Emotional support animal? Valteria asked quizzically. Ah, damn it, Charles would get it. An emotional support animal is an animal that someone keeps around them because it helps them deal with potential emotional outbursts, I guess is the easiest explanation. Anyways, a lot of people on Earth would lie and say that their dog or cat or other animal was an emotional support animal so that it would be allowed in stores and other places where animals traditionally weren't allowed. Well, I'm sure it was funny before you had to explain it, Valteria said. So am I really helping you sweep up? Can we maybe just make a golem to sweep up instead? Well, I don't see any golems laying around here, and I think, and this is just a hypothesis, you understand, but I think it might take us longer to make a golem than it would to just sweep the floor, Valteria retorted, unless you have a golem that just happens to be hiding somewhere. Well, Xander started off smirking. I do have a few here and there, though I suppose it's not much help since they're not here. Wait, Valteria, seriousness returning to her voice. You have golems? Yeah, I made a couple of very simple ones in Ilbeck, during the war. I was lucky enough to get a title that gave me a skill for making better golems from that. It lets me give them what did you call it? Lets me give them a motive force. Seeing Valteria's eyes light up at the words motive force, Xander quickly added, but only to golems that I create. Though I guess if I helped in making one, it might work. Wow, that's certainly a stroke of luck. I can only hope that I get something on my status sheet like that once I wrangle out how to make a golem. Speaking of, would you mind bringing a golem tomorrow when you come by so that I could study it for my own research? Suddenly looking a little sheepish, Valteria added, that is, if you don't mind. I know some artificers, tinkers, well, really any trade class can be very protective of their research and innovations. Don't worry about it, I don't mind. Though I'm not sure how helpful it will be. Mine are all runic-based, no clockwork or mechanisms involved, Xander explained. Hell, they're enough of a rarity that even just seeing how one moves and balances would be a help. Are they really that rare? Xander asked. I've had people comment on them before, too. Valteria shook her head in disbelief. God, Smart, I swear, always doing something insane and then not realizing that it's completely abnormal. A true golem, something with a motive force, is an incredibly complex creation melded with, as you've heard me put it, a motive force. This can be something from a skill like the one you have. Speaking of which, what is the skill you got from your title? I'd like to see it if you don't mind. Oh, sure, Xander answered. He pulled up his status sheet and flipped it around for Valteria to read, point to his Golemancer title and skill. Valteria leaned in slightly to read the portion of his sheet that Xander was indicating. Damn, you marked really do get the luckiest things on your statuses. Though I suppose maybe it's recompense for being pulled here in the first place. Thank you for showing me. She shook her head to clear her thoughts before saying, Now, where was I? Right, motive force. They can be from a skill like yours, which commonly only apply to golems that the holder creates, again, like yours. This makes the golem a little less sellable for a simple reason. The primary holder of authority over the golem will always be the creator of the golem. Sure, you can tell the golem, follow the orders of the person I'm selling you to as if they were my own orders. But you can also rescind that order whenever you want. People don't like the idea that something they spent a lot of money on, and is potentially very deadly, could be taken back away from them or used against them on the whim of the person they bought it from. It requires a higher level of trust than is usually found between people involved in a relatively straightforward sales transaction. The real sellers are golems that are created through a melding of crafting classes and a driving force created through a ritualist, or, in rare cases, the repurposing of monster parts, usually from a naturally occurring golem. When these are created, the person who is applying the motive force to the shell of the golem is generally the one designated as the ultimate authority over the golem. That means that you can sell the shell of a golem by itself, which on its own will cost a goodly amount and the buyer can acquire their own motive force however they desire. Or you can sell a golem in two parts, that is, the shell and the motive force, at the same time and allow the buyer to apply it there and then and walk out with their golem. There's also the measure of complexity of the motive force, she continued. A simple golem is more suited to simple repetitive tasks like housework, and of course would be cheaper than a combat-rated golem that would be required to make actual decisions in the heat of a fight. Xander listened to the impromptu lecture with interest, nodding along at Valteria's points. That all makes sense. I hadn't really thought about mine being less desirable for selling, since I don't really intend to start selling them, but I had been wondering how they were created by other people. So, you're saying that there are, essentially, cheap motive forces that would give the golem a much simpler intelligence than a higher-grade one? Exactly, Valteria answered. Your skill is particularly good in that it allows you to progressively increase the complexity of your golem's motive force. Many skills only provide access to a singular level of intelligence. I see. That actually reminds me of something. I have another skill, automaton, that lets me create something like a golem that lasts for 24 hours. I've used it once to create something that was clockwork before. I could make a clockwork golem and tell it to sweep up, and then you could take a look at it tonight when you get back and all of tomorrow before it dissipates. I'll still bring one of the other golems, of course, Xander said. Yes. I'd like that if you don't mind. I think it would be really helpful. Valteria paused for a moment. Xander? She asked. He replied, distracted by thinking of what kind of construct he should create with automaton. Why are you being so nice to me? Valteria blurted out. Xander cocked his head questioningly. What do you mean? You agreed to help me with my armor and compare notes. You've agreed to help me with runework at the cost of some basic training on some of my knowledge, which is a deal that is firmly in my favor, by the way, and now you're completely happy to let me study your golems. The few people I've met who owned golems, all 2 of them before you, would have forbidden me to even look at their golems on the street if they could, let alone actually examine them. Xander shrugged in confusion. I don't know, none of it seems like a big deal to me. I messed up your armor, and I felt bad about it since it obviously took a lot of work on your part to make, and I have the skills to help you fix it fairly easily. The runework is something I can do at any time, so it has less value to me than learning new things. The golems are part of that, since it's my own runework, and hell, I hardly even use automaton anyways. Xander rubbed the back of his head as he thought out his justifications. Plus, I like you. You seem like a good person. I'd like to be friends with you. And I really like being helpful to my friends. I don't charge friends for things. Whoa, Valteria said absently as she circled the figure. I wasn't expecting something so intricate. Xander stopped Valteria as she pulled out a notebook from one of the pockets of the leather work apron she was wearing. You have time for notes later tonight and all of tomorrow. It's tavern time now. Valteria huffed and stuffed the notebook back into the pocket. Fine. I do still need some drinks. You have a way of creating an emotional scenario out of a conversation, Xander. What can I say? Xander answered with a shrug. I'm in touch with my feelings. Handing his automaton a broom that he found leaned up against the wall in one of the corners of Valteria's shop, Xander commanded the construct to sweep up the floor and then wait by the workstation they had been at previously. The skill-created golem began to sweep up the floor with clicks and whirs of its mechanical body. Shall we? Xander asked, looking back to Valteria, who was watching the golem go about its task with interest. Stepping outside, Valteria closed the door behind Xander and Freya and locked it. Lead the way, Xander said. I've got no idea where we're going. Right, I never mentioned where the other side is, did I? Valteria said. It's over near the water on the far side of the bay. That's the nice part of town, right? Like, the really nice part? I haven't really been there yet. Valteria nodded. Charles has done well with his business and moved the tavern into a building he bought in that area. Oh, about 5 years ago. He was closer, so I would visit more back then. It's still not too long of a walk, though, just about a half hour. No worries on that end. Nothing like strolling the city in the evening time with a lovely lady and a giant cat, Xander replied. I've got nowhere I need to be. Oh, stop it, you! Valteria shoved him slightly, just enough to disrupt his step as they began walking. You'll make me blush. What color do you blush anyway? Xander asked, turning to look at Valteria. A slightly lighter shade of purple. Why do you ask? Valteria answered. Well, I've got to know when my flattery is and isn't working. Xander laughed out. He turned to look at her again and noticed a slight flush of lighter color around Valteria's cheeks. Ah! It looks cute on you! Stop it! Valteria whined, looking about, flustered. Fortunately for her, the street was empty, so there was no one other than Xander to see her embarrassment. You're embarrassing me! Sorry, Xander said, putting his hand up in surrender. I can't help but give a ribbing every now and then. Two of them walked in a companionable silence for the rest of the trip, Valteria leading the way, Xander and Freya following her. Xander let his mind wander as he followed his newfound friend. Xander wondered what Valteria was thinking, first of all. She didn't seem upset with him with the hint of flirting he'd let slip out, so there was that. What was he thinking anyways? He'd just had a very emotional conversation with Valteria, and he'd known her for all of one night and a day. What was he doing letting himself call her a lovely lady and calling her blush cute? He sighed mentally. He was right back where he started with his line of thinking last night. Damn it, did she appreciate his compliment? Did he want her to have appreciated the comment? Did he want to think of this outing as a date of some sorts or just a friendly outing? What did Valteria think of it? He knew he wanted to be wanted. Everyone does, right? That wasn't the hang-up. The hang-up was whether he should allow himself to be wanted or encourage it in any way. Whether or not it was coming from Valteria, he felt like it was disrespectful, in a way, to Helen to even entertain the idea of moving on. They'd had the conversation themselves before, mostly in jest of, oh, if I die, I want you to happy and move on after a while. But the reality felt harder, and neither of them had actually died. He hadn't noticed, but he'd begun to frown as he was thinking, his mind being so comfortable with his constructed body that he subconsciously fed mana to the arrays that were causing him to frown. He didn't even notice that Valteria had stopped and was looking at him until he almost bumped into her. What's the matter? She asked. You were scowling something fierce just then. Oh, sorry, Xander said, rubbing the back of his head again nervously. I was just thinking, brooding, really. Kinda let my thoughts get to me. I understand how that is, Valteria replied. Do you want to talk about it? I find that always helps, having someone to let it out to. Jarrett has heard more than his fair share of my complaints about the world. Fudge. He'd never been a good liar. Honesty had been his preferred policy. He steeled himself with a mental breath. Screw it. Is this a date? Valteria's eyes widened a little, and Xander noticed the color in her face lighten a little in that same shade of purple as before. Do you want it to be a date? She asked carefully. Yes? No? God, that sounds terrible. I do. It's just, I'm also not over everything. Being taken away, you know? So, I want it to be a date, but at the same time, it feels wrong of me to want it to be a date at the same time. Does that make sense? Xander anxiously ran a hand through his hair. Valteria was still staring at him, and she started a little bit when she realized that he was waiting on her for an answer. Sorry, I was listening. I'm just still getting over the fact that someone wants to go on a date with me. She laughed nervously, and Xander joined in, anxiety overcoming him. Valteria recomposed herself with a deep breath. Sorry, I wasn't laughing at you, I swear. I'm just nervous, but, I think I do understand. It's a difficult situation, but, if you'd like it to be a date, I think I'd like that too. Oh, gods, I hate to admit it, but I've never been on a date before. Really? Xander asked, slowly recovering himself. It was easier when one didn't have a heart that could try to escape from its ribcage and organs that would have dumped half their entire supply of adrenaline into his body in this situation. I can hardly believe that. You are a flatterer, aren't you? Valteria said. But no, it's true. My family was protective of me, and that meant protecting me from potential suitors as well. And after I crossed the sea, well, I told you about the failed businesses. No one was exactly lining up to court the weird little purple woman. Xander's jaw practically dropped. They did not call you that, he exclaimed in horror. Well, they didn't know I was listening at the time, but yes, I have in fact been referred to as a weird little purple woman before. I think I cried a little bit after I heard it. I don't know why it hurt so much, but it did. You really find me attractive? We're so different. Of course I do, Xander proclaimed to the empty side street, throwing caution to the wind. He was in this now, and he wasn't about to mess it up on purpose. I happen to love the shade of purple you are, for starters, and you have this passion when you talk about things you care about or discover something new you want to study. It lights up your eyes, your whole face. And why should differences matter? I'm a spirit experiencing the world through a construct from another realm. You're a unique purple woman. Xander gestured playfully, echoing Valteria's words, from a distant land, and I think you're incredible. We can embrace our quirks together if you'd like. Valteria, for her part, was blushing furiously. You really mean it, don't you? She finally asked. Xander nodded. I really do. Freya, back me up here. Valteria is an attractive woman, isn't she? Freya, who had been lazily licking her shoulder through the emotional conversation between the two beings in front of her, rumbled out a small yowl. See, she thinks so too, Xander said with a smile. Valteria seemed to be struggling with the compliments she'd just received, which made sense, as Xander thought back to their previous conversation about her feeling like she was always on the outskirts of things. She likely hadn't been receiving much in the way of compliments for a long time. But his inclusion of Freya finally drew a small laugh from her. Well, if Freya says so, I guess it must be true, she finally relented. Now, if the lady doth still desire, Xander said with an air of mock formality, I shall escort her to the other side. He offered his arm to Valteria, who, after a slight hesitation, took it, and the two of them continued their walk to the tavern side by side, Freya following behind. Once they reached the other side, Xander and Valteria disengaged from each other, Xander opening the door for Valteria to enter, followed by Freya. Ladies first, he told the cat. Xander entered behind Valteria and Freya just in time to hear, Valteria, why is there a giant cat in my tavern? If you love engaging stories like this, make sure to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications to stay updated with all the latest episodes from FY Stories.